Bitcoin is immune from attack. Welcome to the Crypto Show's Digital Cash Evolution here on the Bloomberg Network. And, well, today we're scattered all around the planet. I'm in Austin, Texas, what I call home. My co-host, Chuck Williams, he is in, what part of Hawaii are you in now? You just moved, Chuck.
I recently relocated to Kailua, Hawaii, yeah. Never
even heard of it. And Jeff Berwick, the Dollar Vigilante, is joining us from beautiful, sunny Acapulco, Mexico. Like, is it ever not sunny there?
Just when there's a hurricane, and that's pretty rare.
Pretty rare. Yeah, definitely so. So, Jeff Berwick, he got started very early on in the 90s, one of the very first internet sources that you could get, at least in Canada, for trading stocks and whatnot. So we'll get into that with him as well, and kind of get what his take is on cryptocurrency, which are kind of the new internet, and what part those will play in the market. But let's start off with this crazy stock market thing that's going on right now. I mean, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, what's your perspective on what's going on with the S&P 500, all the crash? Have we hit top? Are we looking at another bear market of a different flavor?
Yeah, I think we have hit the top in the U.S. stock markets. We've been expecting this for the last couple of years, really, just a matter of timing. And we've actually had the worst December since 1931 in the U.S. stock markets right now, which is really interesting because they don't normally take down the markets in December. They usually like to do it in October and January and things like that. So this has been a little bit different this time because most of this is coordinated and planned by the central banks. They've been doing it since the Great Depression in the 1930s. We've been expecting this, and it still could fall a lot further, obviously. This is just the beginning. We're down about 20% now on the year, and it could fall a lot lower than that. And it'll really depend on what the Federal Reserve does. And, of course, Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve are fighting about how they should or should not be raising interest rates 0.25%. But basically, they're arguing about the Titanic. The ship's going down. It doesn't matter what anyone does at this point. This thing, it's been about a 10-year bull market since 2008, since the last crisis. And this is one of the longest bull markets in history now. And it's basically time for it to go down, and it looks like it is.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like we're a bit in agreement. You know, the central banks are manipulating this situation, and, you know, the fiat currency situation has a lot to do with, you know, how the stock market is played, where the money washes out. What's your take on you know, how corporations are going to handle this, how, you know, it's going to affect the economy? What kind of macro effects do you expect to see from this kind of movement?
Well, like I said, we haven't seen anything yet. If we see a true crash, which is totally necessary and normal and something that's needed in the markets, we need to go down another 60 to 70%. And if that happens, we will likely see the Fed print a massive amount of money, way more than they did in 2008, which will quickly send the dollar into hyperinflation within a couple of years. So how companies are going to respond to this, it's going to be incredibly dicey market. The entire economy is going to get really destroyed during this entire process. First by the crash of the market, and that will cause closures of companies. A lot of companies will go bankrupt. Then the printing of money will cause hyperinflation, which will really destroy the market and really almost annihilate it completely. So how anyone survives through this is going to be a real question. And but we're just at the beginning of it now, and it's probably going to happen over the next couple of years. It's not going to happen overnight. But people really should be prepared. And if companies were smart, they'd be actually, if they have any assets, many of them are actually indebted. But if they actually have assets, they should be putting those assets into precious metals and cryptocurrencies. Those are the only two things that are going to survive through this coming crash.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've been telling my friends. And, you know, there's so many different ways that this crisis can happen in different financial markets. We could see bond market crashes. We could see real estate crashes. You know, if the Fed prints money, like you said, you know, that real estate market could be artificially inflated. And you know, that could cause other kinds of issues where we have even more disparity between the wealth, the top 1% and, you know, the bottom half of the nation. So, and I agree with you. You know, I'm a big advocate for cryptocurrency. I see that personally as a safe haven. I'm also a precious metals fan. You know, I try and get as much silver as I can, but, you know, working for a living these days, as most of, you know, the world does, it's difficult to get that scratch. What are your recommendations for people like that? How can we protect ourselves? What moves should we be making?
Well, you pointed out if you don't have any assets, then there's really nothing you need to do except for try to get some assets and try to be more productive. If you do have assets, that's when you really have to try to be careful here. This is going to be a time of immense change. We're going to see the bond market's actually been in a 40-year bull market. And it just started to turn into a bear market over the last year or two. So, this is going to be absolutely massive. The entire bond market's going to get wiped out. So if you own any bonds, they're going to be worthless in the next couple of years. The stock market's going to get wiped out, again, depending on how much money the Fed prints. But for example, the stock market could go down 30, 40, 50%, and then the Fed prints up way more than they did in 2008. That actually could stop the Dow from going down too much further, but it would actually start to hyperinflate the dollars. So you could see the Dow even going to 20 or 30 or 40,000, but a Big Mac at McDonald's might cost you $25 at that point. And that's exactly where it's headed. The U.S. is bankrupt. The U.S. federal government is bankrupt. It's now at $22 trillion. In 2008, when Barack drone bomber, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, became president and his regime was installed, the total amount of debt was under $10 trillion. So we've more than doubled since in the last 10 years in U.S. government debt. So obviously, if you have interest rates rise, which is what everyone's talking about right now, if they rise even a small amount, when you have $22 trillion in debt, the U.S. federal government's already bankrupt. So, and every single part of the federal government is already bankrupt. Social Security, which I call socialist insecurity, which is the world's biggest Ponzi scheme, is already bankrupt. Actually, the thing that's supposed to back up banks, if the banks go bankrupt, is called the FDIC, and it is bankrupt. Every single thing in the U.S. government is bankrupt. It's just a wall of debt right now, and with interest rates about rising just for the first time in a long time, everything's going to get washed out and wiped out. So it's going to be very hard for your average person to get through this unscathed.
It seems like recently they've had a lot more interest rate movement with the Fed, more than they have in previous years. Do you think they're just testing the water right now with that to see what they can get away with, or what?
Well, they held it at almost 0% for about almost 10 years, which is absolutely unheard of. So this is what's caused all these distortions and bubbles and craziness and economic problems, actually. And interest rates have to rise at some point. You can't force interest rates to zero or even negative, which I didn't even think was possible, for too long. The market actually will force that higher. So the Fed actually doesn't fully control that. They've been actually forced to move it up just a little bit, and we're at about 2% now. And even we're seeing at 2%, this could actually destroy the entire system. And this is what Donald Trump has even said. He said, raising it another 0.25, this could destroy everything. He's very angry with the Federal Reserve. He should be angry with the U.S. federal government and the Federal Reserve for everything they've done over the last 100 years to put everyone into this situation. But there's nothing that can be done to stop it at this point.
Well, you're very well informed, Jeff, and this is the kind of information that I'm assuming is going to be being presented at the News Summit. Is this preceding Anarchapulco in February? Is that right?
Yeah, we have the Dollar Vigilante Summit. This will be our, I think, third year. We're going into the fifth year of Anarchapulco, and the Dollar Vigilante Summit actually happens the 2 days before Anarchapulco, so it'll be February 11th and 12th and 13th, and then Anarchapulco is February 14th to 17th. So it's actually 6 entire days, and Anarchapulco has Cryptopulco running the entire 4 days of Anarchapulco. So we'll have a stage just for cryptocurrency and blockchain related things at Anarchapulco. And then the 2 days before is the Dollar Vigilante Summit, which is our newsletter, which will have a lot of financial and investment speakers speaking not only on cryptocurrencies, but precious metals, how to internationalize your assets, how to become a prior taxpayer or a perpetual traveler, the PT theory, and other ways to survive through this coming crash. So yeah, that's all coming up in February.
Nice.
You want to talk about some of the speakers that are going to be speaking for that and kind of what they specialize in? And I believe you have Doug Casey, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's the Dollar Vigilante Summit, so the main speakers are the people from the Dollar Vigilante newsletter, which is myself, and then Ed Bugos, who is my partner at the Dollar Vigilante. We also have Rafael Laverde, who's our cryptocurrency expert. We have Luis Fernando Misas, who handles our groups around the world, which is all expat groups. Aside from that, we have a number of other people speaking, and you pointed out Doug Casey. This will be his first time speaking at both the Dollar Vigilante Summit and Anarchapulco. I'm really excited about that because he's a bit of a mentor of mine. We'll also have David Morgan, who's actually one of the top silver experts in the world. For people on YouTube, you probably know Bix Weir. He'll be there from the Road to Ruta. We have a number of others, all specializing in internationalizing your assets. For example, Joel Bowman, who actually writes The International Man for Doug Casey. He's actually partnered with Doug Casey on that newsletter.
I subscribe to that.
Yeah, he'll be speaking about living internationally and getting your assets internationalized.
Nice. Yeah. So when I was getting into Bitcoin, just a couple notes. I respect a lot of those speakers. Doug Casey, especially. He's as you mentioned. Produces The International Man. And, when I was first getting into Bitcoin, looking at hard money, trying to understand more about the economy, his newsletter really gave me a lot of information that I was looking for, helped me understand a lot of very deep pieces. And Luis Fernando Mises, he's actually a good friend of mine, and I'll have to follow up with him and see what he's going to be talking about. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and some of the other speakers are people like Giedro Griffin. He'll be coming back. He's spoken actually at the last two events that we've had, and he'll be coming back. And Joshua Scagala of Altoro, a lot of crypto-related people. Charlie Robinson, who wrote The Octopus of Global Control, really interesting book that really encompasses what's going on and what's really happening in the world today. People like Tim Pachote, who's actually an accountant who helps you to get your crypto assets and all that sort of stuff out of the being taxable and things like that. Very helpful. Yeah, that sort of a thing. Michael Cobb, also very interesting. He's got a number of developments in Nicaragua and Belize, helping people to get invested, whether it's in real estate or in even things like teak plantations and things like that. So basically all the sort of people, including Gus Damos as well, from Perpetual Assets, who they actually have a self-directed IRA, which you can invest your both precious metals and crypto into. And that's something very important that people out there should know. If you've got money in an IRA, you should get them into a self-directed IRA where you can actually invest them into things like precious metals and crypto. Because if it's just a standard IRA, you can't. You can only invest in things like mutual funds. And as we just pointed out, a lot of those are going to be going down a lot over the next few years. So you can come to the Dollar Vigilante Summit in February and meet all these people and hang out on the beach for a few days and get a game plan for yourself on how you're going to survive and prosper during and after the coming dollar collapse.
Let's wrap up a little bit with that summit. Jeff, you want to talk about some of the call? We mentioned two of those, or actually several of your speakers, but two in particular. You want to kind of recap some of the calls that Doug Casey has made over precious metals and things over the years, and as well, Ed Bugos, who does a lot of your crypto assets and stuff like that for the Dollar Vigilante.
Yeah, actually, Ed Bugos is our senior analyst at the Dollar Vigilante, and we've been recommending Bitcoin since $3 in 2011, Ethereum since $1 in 2016, I believe, and a number of others, Dash and many others, much lower than today's levels. And when Bitcoin hit near $20,000 about a year ago today, Ed Bugos actually came out, and I came out. I went on YouTube and I said it's time to start taking profits and from the cryptos and put it into precious metals. And Ed Bugos actually came out in January of this year, and this is around when Bitcoin was around 17,000. There was still a very bullish market, and he said that he expected that we had hit the top and that we will go into a bear market now. And he said it'll probably last a year or two. And he said the bottom on Bitcoin he expects could be around $3,500, and that's right around where Bitcoin currently has been over the last couple of weeks, which we actually came out and said looks like it is the bottom now. And so he's been incredibly prescient with his picks on the cryptocurrencies.
And so what you're also talking about there, one of the other speakers is going to be Joshua Segala of Volturo. And you're saying to diversify into precious metals, and that's a perfect vehicle to be able to do that, is to use Volturo to just shift right into gold. And upcoming, they'll actually be integrating silver as well. I think they're going to have a silver connected to a Litecoin. How Litecoin is considered to be the silver to Bitcoin's gold. And so he's going to do something fun with Litecoin and pegging silver to it, or not pegging it, but offering silver through Litecoin. So if you're taking your profits on the way up on this next bull run, that's a good option to hold for the next bottom.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like an amazing summit for anybody who's interested in learning about where to put your money, where to put your value when the most of the value of the world is going to be hit by fiat currency collapse, hyperinflation. The FDIC is not going to protect your bank money. If you've got the wrong kind of IRA, you're not going to be protected. The 401ks are mostly stock invested, so there's risk involved with that. If the bond market crashes, the most stable thing that a lot of traditional financial analysts believe in is basically getting the rug pulled out from under them. Real estate market, we don't know what's going to happen with that. Even if the values do continue to increase, it could be hyperinflated values. So, there's a number of things that just gets into a scary, scary position. And, to be honest, that is one of the reasons that I've relocated here to Hawaii, is to just see if I can get a little bit insulated from all of that activity that's going to happen over there on the mainland. Even though things are very expensive here, $1 million 3-bedroom place might not be, something too unreasonable when you're paying, like you said, $25 for a Big Mac. So let's hope it doesn't get too horrible, but let's get that message out. And I really appreciate your work on this, Jeff. Do you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you've kind of gone to Hawaii to get away from things. I'm here in Mexico. I've been here for a while, expecting this collapse to get really ugly. Danny is there in Austin, but he spends a lot of time down here in Latin America as well. And he's basically living mobile-like, ready to go at any moment. And not to say that it's going to be like Mad Max.
I'm ready for bug out.
Yeah. Not to say it's going to be a complete Mad Max situation of just people eating each other in the streets or anything. But it could get a little hairy, definitely in some of the major cities when we have this massive crash and crisis happen. Even during 2008, we saw almost all food transportation across the world stop for a couple of days because most of these big shippers and tankers work on bank credit letters, and no one knew which banks were actually solvent, so no one was willing to actually ship. And if you know anything about how the food industry works today in our modern world, most food is shipped from thousands of miles away, and it's shipped just a couple days. You just have a couple days on supply. So we've even seen food stamps when they go down in the U.S., which has almost 50 million people on food stamps. That's how bad the economy is doing in the U.S. It's when they go down for even a couple of days, you see riots in the streets. So you can imagine how bad things can get if we have this major, massive crisis collapse where the dollar actually gets completely wiped out, all banks close, which we've seen in numerous countries. This is nothing outside of normal. Greece has seen this. Cyprus saw the bank bail-ins where they closed the banks and then took 50% of people's money over the weekend. We've seen, of course, Zimbabwe and Venezuela, and Argentina does it every 10 years. This is just fairly normal, but the U.S., because it's been so big and so large and so wealthy for so long, mostly because it used to be a free country like 100 years ago, it's still been living off of that wealth and living off the fact that people around the world have been using the U.S. dollar, which is now coming to a stop. Russia started to sell treasury bonds and buy gold, by the way. China, very similar. People are moving away from the dollar now, and when this happens, it's going to wipe out the dollar, and most people are not ready for what's going to happen. And yeah, there could be some interesting times ahead for some people as basically stores get shut down, grocery stores just have nothing in them, banks get shut down, and how many people in the U.S. are on pharmaceuticals and things like Prozac and all these sort of things. They won't have access to those for a few days. And
these situations, they're very scary, and I try to talk to my friends from a very basic kind of personal empathic perspective. I try to tell them, look, you need to care for yourself, get some water in your house, and enough food to carry you through that most crazy period of time, because things are going to reset. And the thing that I always also say, which I'm in agreement with you, the government never tells you when this is going to happen. They might have advance notice. They might know that this is coming for some period of time, but only the very extremely well-connected and wealthy are going to be just fine and weather this storm. And it's the rest of us that are going to have to deal with the fallout of, like you said, failed supply chains, empty grocery stores, closed banks, and we're going to have to figure out how to work through those broken systems when those systems break. So yeah, I agree, and I really want to thank you for sharing these messages, and hopefully we can get this message out in an empathic way and offer cryptocurrency as a peer-to-peer way to transact when those things happen. That's why I think there's going to be a flood.
Let's touch on crypto as a remittance. Jeff has actually taken a trip before to Venezuela and seen what's going on there. And, as we all know, cryptocurrency is really taking off there right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jeff?
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. What
you've seen in Venezuela and why you think crypto is taking off.
Yeah, I've been to Venezuela numerous times. I was there about 10 or 15 years ago, and it was really nice. It was really amazing. Right around when Chavez just got in, it just started to get bad. But before that, Venezuela was an amazing place. It was one of the richest countries in the world. And then Chavez and communism and socialism and all these sort of things came in. And then after that, Maduro just continued on with that. And I actually went back to Venezuela last year when things were getting really bad, but it's actually even worse now. And there was really like no tourism. There was only one hotel that we could find to stay in that was open, and it was like the nicest hotel right downtown, and they would actually pile up the furniture at night so people couldn't get in and come and kill us because they were hungry and stuff like that. Everything was closed. If we wanted to get, buy dinner at some of the few restaurants that were still open, we'd have to bring a backpack full of money. Now that's like a carload full of money. Basically, the Venezuelan strong bolivar, which was their second currency after the bolivar hyperinflated about 10 years ago, they've started a new one, and that's now hyperinflated. It's almost zero as well. So they've actually said they're coming out with a cryptocurrency, so-called, based on their petroleum reserves, which is an absolute joke. But yeah, there in Venezuela, it's really interesting because one of the things they subsidize completely under this idea of communism and giving everything for free to people is electricity. So Bitcoin mining and cryptocurrency mining is actually the best in Venezuela, but it's also highly illegal because they don't want anyone doing that there. And actually, if you do get caught by the government mining cryptocurrencies, they will take your equipment. And I think they just basically end up at Maduro's palace and they just mine it themselves. Yeah. But crypto, that's an excellent example of the use cases for cryptos when we go through a hyperinflation. We've seen this in Zimbabwe as well. Crypto is very popular in Zimbabwe for the same reason. It's had two hyperinflations in the last 10 years also. Venezuela, it's popular. Argentina, it's very popular. I think you've been down there, Danny, for the Latin American Bitcoin conference, and I've been there numerous times, and there's a big Bitcoin community there in Argentina for the same reason, because the currency keeps hyperinflating, and we're going to see that happen with the US dollar, with the euro, with every single fiat currency in the world. They're all backed by nothing, and they're all printing up massive amounts of money.
Something I found really interesting, I just left that the Latin American Bitcoin conference in Chile, and they have a similar situation to what you guys are doing, or what you guys have in Mexico with Chiron. There's a down by Valdivia, there's an area where the Mapuche Indians live, and they're in a conflict with the government, and they don't want to use the Chilean peso, and so the Bitcoiners there are trying to reach out to them and get some kind of cryptocurrency going with the Indian tribe there. So we'll see how that turns out. But when they described to me what was going on, it just reminded me exactly of what's going on in Mexico at Chiron.
Yeah, that's great. I'm a big supporter of all these sort of movements to get away from all these evil and heinous governments across the world and become more sort of, community controlled, and the community controls itself rather than having these big governments, which we have today. And of course, the big plan is to work towards a one world government, with the UN being the world government of all places in the world, which would be the absolute worst case scenario. And the best case scenario is we have 7 billion governments on Earth.
And we're talking about Anarchapulco and the economy and everything else. So let's find out a little bit about Anarchapulco. Chuck, you're speaking there. Let's start with you.
Well, I'm not speaking there this year. I spoke there last year, and it was one of the most privileged events that I was happy to be a part of. I have to say, I went to my first and only Burning Man in 2013, and it was there was a lot of the same similar kind of vibrations, I would say, from the people. There's a lot of love in the air, a lot of connectivity. People really wanted to connect. There are a lot of very high level conversations just randomly at various points throughout the whole conference every day. A lot of my personal heroes attended. Mark Passio comes to mind, and he did an event there last year. And there's who am I thinking of? Max Egan. and a number of other people, just great like thinkers of our day who are looking at our reality and paying attention to what is real and not being duped by the systems of control that surround us in both in terms of government and finance, and really speaking the ideals of personal freedom. So I love this event for that reason, and I always advocate for freedom. I always advocate for individuals doing their own research, doing their own thinking, making their own choices, and being able to manage their own finances or whatever without being controlled by other people. And that's really the big deal, right? So I want to understand, like, how is this going to grow? I've had a few conversations with a few of your people on staff, and you've got an event management staff. There's been a lot of growth. You guys are meeting regularly now. It's ramping up. I'm really excited to attend this year. What's new? What's bigger and better?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. This year in 2018 was really the first year this really took off. Before that, our first year was 5 years ago in 2000, I guess that'd be, 14? Yeah, 14. We had about 150 people show up. The next year was 350, 400 people. The next year was around 800, then 1,500 this year, and we're expecting about 3,000. So it's actually doubled every single year. And this year was the first time that I really got the sense that it had really taken on a life of its own. Before then, it was just something we were trying and see if it would work. And it just really took off this year. So we've already sold way more than we've sold last year. We still have a month and a half left before the conference. We might sell out beforehand. So if you want to get tickets, make sure you get them as soon as you can, because there is a hard limit of 3,000 people. And we're just bringing in the top speakers we can possibly think of to talk about freedom. For people out there who might be listening, like on Bloomberg Radio, you might not even be aware of what real freedom is. If you live in the United States and you think you live in the land of the free, you're basically, you've been lied to your entire life. It's no different than North Korea, basically, where you live. It's just a different way of lying to you through the propaganda. And people just really don't realize that this whole left-right paradigm that's been going on now for decades and centuries is all a big scam to keep you enslaved. And the real answer is self-ownership. And there's another word for that, and that's called voluntarism. And there's another word for that, which they try to make sound scary on the news on purpose, and that's called anarchy, which just means no rulers, that people are not slaves. And that's what everyone who speaks in Anarchapulco believes in. And of course, we have excellent speakers, including Ron Paul coming back for his second year. He was one of the biggest people kind of really spreading this message inside the U.S., where they're so highly propagandized and don't get access to much real information, which is sort of coming out now with things like fake news and things like that. And Judge Andrew Napolitano, he's a hardcore Rothbardian anarchist. He's on Fox quite a bit. He's coming. David Icke, a big truth speaker, talks about a lot of the agendas of what might be going on in the world. Doug Casey, Cynthia McKinney, who's an ex-congressperson who realized the whole system is a big scam. She'll be speaking as well.
She's a hero of my father-in-law.
What's that?
Cynthia McKinney happens to be a hero of my father-in-law. She served in the Senate, the Atlanta Senate, I believe, in the state of Georgia, for the state of Georgia. And she's really kind of awakened to the government and its machinations from the inside, and decided to depart from it in kind of a grandiose way, I think, with her life. And now, I haven't followed her very directly, but I had personal conversations with her. And, she and I are in agreement about, these same kinds of ideals. And it's really exciting to see this movement happening at all levels of people who've been engaged in government and seen it for what it is, and turn to the side of personal governance, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. She was a real true hero, because she stood up to the government so many times. She stood up to a lot of the wars. She was one of the first people to question 9/11, the official story of 9/11, soon after, when it was basically so taboo to even question what the government narrative on 9/11 was. She was right there pointing out that Donald Rumsfeld said that $2.3 trillion was missing on September 10th, 2001, and she pointed all that out. And she basically got ran out of of government, which was what happens if you ever get a few decent people, which is very, very rare in government. Basically, we've got the only two decent ones that I know of that have ever been in the U.S., and that's Ron Paul and Cynthia McKinney, and they've moved out of there, and they were both run out of there. As you know, with Ron Paul, he was filling football stadiums full of people during the 2008 election cycle when he was just running for the Republican Party, and people like Mitt Romney and all those guys had like small high school gyms with the half full of people. He had football stadiums full, but the media and the government made sure that most people didn't realize that they did all the things they do to make sure that people who actually really do care about.
That's how I became a Republican delegate, was through Ron Paul, and the whole in the Fed idea is what led me to cryptocurrencies as well. And I think there's quite a few people actually that have ended up in cryptocurrencies from Ron Paul and G. Edward Griffin as well.
Well, it looks like you got Larkin Rose to commit also, who also is a big fan of freedom. He spent some time in jail, so he's very familiar with the prison system, and he speaks a lot on the superstition, the greatest superstition that we call authority, and Dana Martin, who I have great respect for as a father, who I understand teaches on allowing your children the principles of freedom from day one, essentially, and not treating your children like property and allowing them to make decisions, but yet guiding them and being responsible for them, which is honestly one of the reasons that my ex-wife and I separated, because I had these ideals of freedom and principles and teaching my children, what exists in the world, and she wanted to control them and label them and teach them or keep them as property and things like that. These are the dichotomies that we deal with in this day and age, and it's so refreshing to see a dedicated conference to sit on the side of freedom and educate people and awaken the eyes of people, and give people who already are engaged in this space an outlet, a place for camaraderie. What other place do a group of individualists and anarchists and voluntarists come together and work together to just learn and share and rub elbows with one another and connect?
Yeah, absolutely. Dana Martin's actually the leader of basically the worldwide unschooling movement, and she just spoke in front of numerous people. She's like almost famous in numerous places, including Mexico. She's very famous here. She also just was in China, where she had a big amount of people came out to see her. And as you pointed out, it's basically about treating kids peacefully, and the entire philosophy of anarchism, of no rulers, is that you don't enslave people. You don't force people to do things that they don't want to do. And of course, what more than that should be with children. Children, as politicians always say, children are the future, but they really are. And if you're treating them, you're hitting them and spanking them and beating them up and giving them all these rules, they're going to turn into not so great people. And it's a kind of hard for a lot of people to get their head around, because they've been indoctrinated for so long in the government schools. That's for 12 years and things like that. But I've met a lot of these unschooled kids, and they're absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and the challenge that I've always had, that particular perspective is many people are supported in the idea that your children are your property. And I've always had a problem with that, because if you think that a human can be property, well, then you're fundamentally supporting slavery. And I think a lot of people have trouble understanding that.
Yeah, a lot of people have a lot of problems understanding a lot of things because they went to government indoctrination camps for 12 years and they never even teach you how to think in those things. They just teach you how to memorize dates of what president did what and all this propaganda and the useless information and things like that. But, at Anarchapulco, we actually have, during the entire time, we're going to have something called Free Your Family Camp. So we have, I think, 100 families already have said they're coming with their kids. And they'll be actually learning about peaceful parenting, unschooling, and even entrepreneurship for kids and things like that, all for families at Anarchapulco. So it's a big part of Anarchapulco now.
That's very exciting.
So you're mentioning kids. Will you be keeping the whole the strip club thing? That's going to be away, or what? How's that going to work?
Well, we bought out the entire hotel. It's a 1,000-room hotel called the Princess, and we will have a number of adult activities as well. It is a conference for anarchists, and that means that you can do pretty much anything you want as long as you don't hurt anyone else. And we want to show people what that's really like. So yeah, there will be a sort of a gentleman's club. It'll be in the basement. It won't be anywhere the kids will stumble upon it or anything like that. There'll be entire areas that'll just be for the families and things like that. So for a father who comes with his family, he can spend the day with the kids, hear a bunch of amazing speakers, hang with some great people, and then if he'd like, he can go down to the basement afterwards and have a drink and enjoy things that men kind of like. And not to mention that there is sort of like we're not sure if it's a real strip club, so to speak, but it's sort of going to be like a gentleman's sort of club. But we will have male sort of talent in there as well. So it's not just for men; it's also for women.
Have you seen Chuck's dance moves?
No, I'm not sure I do, but
we haven't been on the floor together yet. Maybe this will be an opportunity. I would
see. You might be speaking at Anarchapulco after all.
No, thank you. Well, and on that note, I mean, just to mention,
it's called body language, Chuck.
Right. There's what is it? There's also a nude only pool. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a number of pools at the Princess, and there's a couple of people approached us, and they're really into nudism. And of course, as anarchists, and it basically we call the whole conference, the motto for this year is Life Unchained. And it's really rethinking everything that we've been told and everything in our society that we've been told is the way it should be. And we got approached by some nudists, and I'm personally not into this sort of thing at all. I've never been to a nudist thing anywhere. I'm not sure if I'll go to the one that we're going to have. But they were saying, it's very freeing to get your clothes off and just hang out with people. And so we said, well, if you're coming, you might as well just have a small area where we can call it a swimsuit optional sort of area.
What do you mean by hang out?
Yeah, there's a lot of jokes can be told about this entire event this year, but really we want to just show people the full wealth of things that are available in basically anarchy. And so basically you can do almost anything you want for an entire week in Acapulco, and we just want to really show the world that they've heard the word anarchy means danger and violence and death and chaos. What it really means is a really good time, and people just having a really enjoyable time, just not aggressing against other people.
Freedom of the mind, freedom of expression, and on expression, you're having art installations on the beach, isn't that right? Do you know how many artists are going to be contributing to that?
I'm not sure, but for the last few years, we've had Mir One, who's a really famous graffiti artist. He's actually done major paintings at our event. I believe he's coming back. There's going to be a number of art events, definitely. A number of musical acts. We actually still haven't announced them, but last year we had a surprise. Number of the guys from Wu-Tang Clan showed up at the last minute. We had a number of fairly big rappers there. We're going to have even more this year. We haven't even announced them yet. Those are all going to be out on the beach in a big sort of concert setting on the beach every night at Anarchapulco. So it's a big party.
Oh, yeah.
For a week.
4 nights of concerts.
I want to suggest a local band that's really kicking. And that would be the Marsh Orphanage, the kids over there. Maybe you could have them open the show or something. I don't know. That'd be pretty cool. They've got their own little band and everything. It's kind of cool.
Oh, do they? Yeah, I've actually met the Marsh Orphanage kids, and we're actually supporters of them. We want to be bigger supporters at Anarchapulco of them. So yeah, I didn't know they had a band. Maybe we'll talk to them.
Yeah, definitely.
And we also one thing
hit me up for that. I'll definitely. I'm already very familiar with them, and I'd love to lead that up if you want to do anything.
Sure, absolutely. And we should mention too, you brought up Sharan earlier. The actual town elder from Sharan will be one of the speakers at Anarchapulco. His name's Tata Meche, and he'll be busing in from Michoacan, from Sharan, with a number of people from Sharan, and they're very excited about it as well. So we have of course the president of Liberland will be there. We have the CEO of the Seasteading Institute. So a lot of places that are starting out free areas across the world, all the top people from those areas will be at Anarchapulco.
And let's talk a little bit about Chiron. Actually, they're not anarchists by name. They don't call themselves anarchists or anything like that. But they took the initiative to first get rid of the politicians, then they got rid of the police, and then once the police were gone, there was no one to protect the cartel, so they kicked the cartel out in that order, right?
Yeah, basically, it was about 10 years ago, and this town has been, the people in this town have been there for millennia, really. I don't even know how long, and they've actually fought off numerous sort of aggressions, including way back the Aztecs, and then after that, they fought off the Spanish. Then they fought off just recently the Mexican government. They said, we don't want anyone controlling us here. We control ourselves. And 10 years ago, they kicked out the government, politicians. They don't allow anyone with any sort of political stickers on their cars to come into the town. And we actually talked to the town elder who will be speaking in Anarchapulco, and we said, would you describe this as anarchy? And he said, if you would have asked me a few years ago, I would say no, because I didn't understand what the word meant, but he understands what the word means now, which just means no rulers. And he said, yes, absolutely. This is basically an anarchist town of 30,000 people right in the middle of Mexico. And of course, what a big shock. The U.S. State Department calls it one of the most dangerous places in the world, and it's actually one of the most nicest places I've ever visited in my entire life.
Wow, that's great. So Sharon is actively working in this environment where they essentially rule themselves. It sounds like they have at least decent levels of trade. How do they survive? Do they have roads? Do they have schools?
Yeah, there's everything there. You can have all these things without government, and it's an old sort of way that they've been doing it for centuries as a sort of a tradition of everyone in the entire town has a say. So there's no president, there's no mayor, there's nothing. But if you want to do anything fairly major in the town, you need pretty much everyone in the entire town just to agree with it, which is really interesting. And of course, it's not necessarily a perfect model necessarily, but it's one that they've tried out, and it seems to work phenomenally well. They do a lot of trade in that area. I saw a lot of well-to-do people in that area. There's a lot of natural resources in the area. There's a lot of manufacturing and warehouses and that sort of stuff. Saw just trucks coming in and out of there. So they're doing fairly well, and essentially just with zero government whatsoever, and they won't even allow any politicians, any government, any police into the area whatsoever. And it's one of the safest places on earth. And it actually used to be really bad back when the government was involved, because the government, just like in any country, including the U.S., is absolutely not trying to work for the people. It actually enslaves the people, and it just gets worse and worse, and that sort of a thing. But they've managed to throw off the government, and it's turned into one of the best places in the world now.
Wait a minute.
So one of their main resources was actually lumber. So they had a lot of pine trees and everything, and the cartel were just destroying them and burning them. And that was one of the things that just sent them over the edge. That's when they started kicking out the politicians and the police and then the cartel, is because they were destroying their resources. And so now they're thriving that they've got that back.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like they kind of rule by consensus. Is that, like the individuals kind of raise their voice and they agree, and nothing really happens unless there's a large agreement, it sounds like more than a majority, more than 50%.
A lot of tribal rule.
Okay, very interesting. It sounds like a certain kind of protocol that rules by consensus that I'm familiar with.
I don't know which one.
Yeah, it's basically just anarchy, really, is what it is, and it works phenomenally well. And that's why if you see anything about it in the media or from the U.S. government, they will talk about it as one of the worst, most dangerous places in the world to ever go. And you just have to see it for yourself. It's the exact opposite. It's an absolutely wonderful place. And they actually haven't had any crime whatsoever since they kicked out the government. And that was about 10 years ago. They said there's been a few kids broke some windows once. But before when the government was there, the place was rampant with murder, kidnapping, extortion, all kinds of stuff. And it's all been gone since they got rid of the government.
Well, that's interesting. I'd love to do some research on that, because I'm not intelligent enough to ask a whole lot of questions about it. But you know that there are people. I'm sure that you hear the skeptics' voices out there. Well, they must have vigilante groups. They must have this or that. I have to say that those people who are maybe perhaps listening to this and hearing this idea for the first time, it's possible. I really believe that it's possible for groups of humans to rule themselves. We don't have to have rulers. I really believe this. And I think that for those who aren't capable of ruling themselves, they're the ones who don't really understand this idea. They always think there must be, some sort of institution, some sort of religion, some sort of government, some sort of somebody. But the thing is, how do you tell those people that, look, why would you give somebody else the power to rule over you if you don't believe that people are capable of ruling themselves? And it's just a very confusing question.
Yeah, it's that old sort of the circular argument of that, people are bad, so therefore we need a government made of people to rule over people. It just makes absolutely no sense. And it's sort of like when you look back at communism for the last 200 years, you see it's just disaster after disaster. It's only the really brainwashed, the kids who are in the government schools and colleges for 8 years who think this is really a good idea. Anyone who's seen it and actually is able to think rationally knows that communism just doesn't work. And it's the same thing for government. Really, there's not a lot of difference between government and communism. They're both central planning. And we can see with communism, when you centrally plan the economy, nothing works right. It turns into a disaster. People start starving. They start killing each other, things like that. It's the exact same thing with government. Government is central planning of people. And you don't have any say in it. So it's actually slavery. So all those people out there who say that they're thank goodness we got rid of slavery a few hundred years ago. No, we didn't. The entire world is enslaved now. And most people just don't, unfortunately, realize it because they've been brainwashed in government indoctrination camps and watch their mainstream television programming. And it's called programming for a reason. It's literally hypnosis and brainwashing via television. So your average person just doesn't see it, but they actually are almost completely enslaved.
I don't know.
Well, Jeff, I could go on for hours.
Equinox.
Yeah. What do you think, Danny? Should we wrap this up?
Yeah.
Are we about that time?
Wrap this up. Let give out the information about Anarchapulco, and if you're listening to the crypto show, you can always use the coupon code crypto CRYPTO and save some money there. But give us the details on the conference.
Sure. Yeah. If you're into the financial crypto stuff, anything financial that we were mentioning, check out the Dollar Vigilante newsletter at dollarvigilante.com/subscribe. If you want to come to the summit with a lot of amazing speakers, Edward Griffin, Doug Casey, so many others, that's coming up February 12th, 13th. That's at tdvsummit.com. And then right after that, it's one of the most amazing conferences in the world. Almost everyone says that if they've come. It's a little akin to Burning Man, but it's more capitalist, and it's a lot more free market. So it's a completely free market sort of event. If you want to see what that's like, come down to Anarchapulco, and you can find that just at anarchapulco.com. It's hard to type in, but if you type it in on Google, you should find it.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for coming on, Jeff. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
All righty.